The world watched closely as President Donald Trump engaged in a whirlwind of high-stakes diplomacy. This effort is centered on ending the brutal war in Ukraine, which has now raged for over 3 years. On Friday, August 15th, Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in a highly scrutinized summit held in Alaska. Just days later, on Monday, August 18th, he welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and a host of European leaders to the White House. These meetings represent a significant and controversial push by the Trump administration to broker a peace deal, an ambition that has drawn both praise for its boldness and sharp criticism for its methods and potential outcomes. The context for these discussions is a conflict that has caused immense suffering and reshaped global alliances. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 escalated a conflict that truly began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. Since then, the fighting has been relentless. Just recently, Russian airstrikes have continued to claim civilian lives across Ukraine, with deadly attacks reported in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk. President Zelensky has accused Putin of using these demonstrative killings as a grim tactic to pressure Ukraine and its European allies into accepting a deal on Russia's terms, making the search for a just peace all the more urgent and complex. The guest list for the White House meeting highlights the international significance of these talks. Alongside President Zelensky were key European figures, including UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and French President Emmanuel Macron. Leaders from Italy, Finland, NATO, and the European Union were also present, underscoring a united yet tense European front. Their goal is to navigate the difficult path toward a resolution, but deep divisions remain on the core issues, particularly regarding Ukraine's future security and territorial integrity, which are major points of contention in any potential agreement. For President Trump, these summits are a central part of his second-term foreign policy agenda. He has consistently claimed that he could end the war quickly, and these meetings are his attempt to prove it. However, his approach has been anything but conventional. He has openly challenged long-standing diplomatic norms, directly engaging with adversaries, and publicly criticizing allies. This strategy keeps supporters hopeful for a breakthrough but leaves many critics, both at home and abroad, deeply concerned about the concessions that might be made and the long-term consequences for both American influence and Ukrainian sovereignty. The meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska was a pivotal moment, designed to lay the groundwork for a broader peace negotiation. The choice of an American location was, according to Trump, a significant concession from the Russian leader. However, the summit immediately drew criticism from various political observers and media outlets. Many commentators argued that hosting Putin on United States soil without clear preconditions or immediate gains for Ukraine amounted to a diplomatic victory for the Kremlin. They suggested that it legitimized Putin's position on the world stage while offering little in return, a perception that fueled a wave of negative press coverage. Following the summit, detailed reports of what was discussed began to emerge, painting a picture of difficult negotiations. Key topics included the potential for exchanges of territory and the nature of future security guarantees for Ukraine. President Trump announced that Putin had agreed in principle to Russia accepting security guarantees for Ukraine, a statement intended to signal progress. Despite this, the lack of a joint press conference or a detailed communiqué left many questions unanswered. The ambiguity surrounding the summit's results allowed critics to frame it as a major defeat for American interests, a narrative that Trump would later vehemently contest. One of the most significant shifts to come out of the Alaska meeting was President Trump's reversal on a key precondition for peace talks. Previously, a ceasefire was widely considered a necessary first step before any meaningful negotiations could begin. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had even called it a necessity. However, Trump declared, "I don't think you need a ceasefire," suggesting that talks could proceed even as the fighting continues on the ground. This change in stance was seen by some as a pragmatic move to get the parties to the table, but others viewed it as a dangerous concession that could weaken Ukraine's negotiating position. The immediate aftermath of the summit was characterized by intense debate and political maneuvering. While President Trump aimed to project an image of strength and successful deal-making, his opponents worked to portray the meeting as a strategic blunder. The lack of concrete publicly announced achievements from the one-on-one discussion with Putin provided ample room for speculation and criticism. This set the stage for the subsequent meeting with President Zelensky and European leaders, where the pressure was on Trump to demonstrate that his high-risk diplomatic strategy could produce tangible results benefiting Ukraine and its allies. In the wake of the Alaska summit, President Trump took to his social media platform, Truth Social, to launch a blistering counterattack against his critics. He directed his tirade at what he consistently labels the fake news media, as well as at Democratic opponents and even Ukrainian President Zelensky. Trump fiercely rejected reports that the summit was a failure, arguing that the media would have criticized him regardless of the location or outcome. He insisted that getting Putin to come to the United States was a major achievement in itself, and that his critics were simply stupid people who were actively making it harder to end the war. A primary target of Trump's frustration was Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut. After Murphy appeared on television calling the summit a win for Putin and describing Trump's recent federalization of the Washington, D.C. police force as a political stunt, the president responded with deeply personal insults. He labeled the senator very unattractive, both inside and out, and a lightweight. Trump claimed that nobody got anything yet from the summit, but that a peace deal was getting closer, accusing figures like Murphy and former National Security Advisor John Bolton of undermining his efforts with their public skepticism. The president also directed pointed comments toward Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In a statement that surprised many, Trump asserted that Zelensky can end the war with Russia almost immediately, if he wants to. This remark appeared to place the onus for peace squarely on the shoulders of the Ukrainian leader, who is currently managing a nation under daily assault. Trump also referenced history, blaming the Obama administration for Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea, and suggesting that Ukraine's own discussions about potentially joining the NATO alliance had provoked the 2022 invasion, echoing a long-standing Kremlin talking point. Beyond the Ukraine conflict, Trump used his social media platform to defend his domestic policies, particularly his decision to federalize the D.C. police and deploy the National Guard from several states. He accused Democrats and the media of wanting crime to run rampant in the nation's capital, framing his actions as necessary for restoring law and order. This blending of foreign policy criticism with domestic political battles is a hallmark of Trump's communication style, as he sought to rally his base by portraying himself as a leader fighting against a unified front of political enemies, both at home and abroad. The negotiations to end the war in Ukraine are fraught with immense challenges, centered on three core issues: territory, NATO membership, and security guarantees. Each of these points represents a deep-seated conflict between the demands of Russia, the needs of Ukraine, and the positions of Western allies. On the issue of territory, reports suggest that Vladimir Putin is demanding Ukraine cede at least 20% of its land, including Crimea and other regions currently under Russian occupation. While President Trump has hinted that Ukraine may need to accept some territorial losses for peace, President Zelensky insists that Ukraine's sovereign territory cannot be bargained away. The question of Ukraine's potential membership in NATO is perhaps the most significant sticking point. President Trump has been unequivocally clear on this matter, stating, "No going into NATO by Ukraine." This stance directly aligns with one of Russia's primary security demands, but places him in direct opposition to key allies like the United Kingdom. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has publicly declared that Ukraine's path to joining the alliance is irreversible. This fundamental disagreement between Washington and London on a core principle of European security complicates any unified Western approach to the negotiations. As an alternative to NATO membership, the Trump administration has proposed a different model of security guarantees for Ukraine. These guarantees would be structured similarly to NATO's Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all, but would exist outside the formal NATO alliance. However, Ukrainian officials are deeply skeptical of such proposals, viewing non-NATO guarantees as an illusion. They point to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, in which Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurances that ultimately failed to prevent Russian aggression, as a cautionary tale against accepting weaker protections. These complex and overlapping issues illustrate why a quick resolution remains elusive. The meetings in Alaska and Washington have successfully brought the key players to the table, but they have also laid bare the profound divisions that must be overcome. President Trump's diplomatic push has forced a global conversation on what a final peace could look like. But the path forward requires navigating the sensitive balance between achieving peace and upholding the principles of national sovereignty and international law. The world now waits to see if this high-stakes gamble can bridge the vast gulf between the warring nations and their allies.